This is the man whose efforts US Treasury Secretary Henry Paulson says will save the global economy. Farmer Wang Zhenyuan's income may not amount to much, but combined with that of his 1.3 billion compatriots, it makes up one of the mightiest forces in the global economy. But how does he feel about being called to the financial aid of some of the richest countries in the world?
There are many countries poorer than the United States. Why should we help them? Just because they say they need it, we can't just help anyone who asks for it.
Leaders from Europe and Asia are gathering in the Chinese capital. The main topic of conversation: will China come to the aid of the world's faltering economy? Chinese President Hu Jintao is reported to have discussed the global crisis with George Bush on the phone earlier this week, expressing his hope that the US government's bailout plan will work. But is China likely to listen to calls from the US government and others to contribute to a global financial bailout?
I think it's not realistic to put so much hope on China per se. The economy has not reached the size that is strong enough to save the world.
On the streets of Beijing, international brand names evidence that China is no longer isolated. But the shoppers here are unlikely to offer any salvation.
The Chinese consumer is quite obviously still shopping, and they do have money to spend. But China hasn't developed into a major market for imported goods, and the Chinese consumer is very frugal. Savings levels here are some of the highest in the world.
The drop in the global markets has unnerved Chinese companies and investors. Exports are down and the growth of the economy has dropped to 9%. But China still has foreign currency reserves of $1.9 trillion, money that would buy a lot of confidence in today's shaky markets. Nonetheless, while millions have been lifted out of poverty in the past decade, hundreds of millions are still there. The migrant workers who've fueled the boom are still living in terrible conditions on wages often no more than $1 a day. Last week, thousands of workers converged on a toy factory in the southern city of Guangzhou, demanding government compensation for losing their jobs. It's just the sort of social instability that unnerves the leaders in Beijing. And 700 million people remain in the countryside. China's rural poor may not have a vote, but the government knows it can't ignore them.
We're not going to throw the money into this if we know that a good return will not be there, or we're not going to, the money will not be safe.
The future for these people isn't sitting in funds or shares. Basic housing and food are the benchmark for most people here. And while China is likely to contribute some of its rich harvest to stabilizing the global economy, as the winter approaches, the government has more pressing concerns at home.